Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is a chatty one, and it's based on a theme. Why do our orchids die? Well, sometimes the answer is very simple. They just do. But if you stand back and have a think, a lot of the time it's going to be cultural issues. Yeah, you have to bear in mind, a lot of the types of orchids we grow come from tropical regions, and here in the UK, if you look out the window, it couldn't be classed as farther away from a tropical environment than you could imagine. So I'll take an example. I bought my mouth won't work, an anosmum at the beginning of the year. Now that plant had been unceremoniously ripped away from where it was growing in its home environment, probably torn off a tree or off whatever it was growing on, and then it had all its roots chopped off, leaving stumps about 1.5 inches long, and then it was packed up and exported with the travel issues. Now, okay, it was in a dormant state, so that probably didn't do it as much harm as you might think, and that took it to a new country. And then it sat there for a while, maybe not in ideal conditions, and then it was packed up again and sent to me, and that's how I got it. In a poor state, I would say. But it was a mature plant. And these are hardy beasts, and let's see if I can find it. Yeah, I mean, here it is up here. Well, it's up there. It's also down here. Yeah. So it survived its ordeal. And this year it's grown well. Lovely long new cane, hopefully get some blooms off of that, and 2 more new growths coming at the top, including one from the back end of the plant, and a massive root system. Now, how did it do that? Well, it did that because I looked after it, and therein lies another problem. Some of us have busy lifestyles, we got work to do, sometimes away from home, all things like that. So there's a care issue involved here. How much care, how much time can you spend? And quite honestly, an easy answer to that is to get plants that will fit the care you can give them. Yeah? So if you're away at work for a week at a time, I used to work like that. I used to be away and stopping in hotels, travelling around the country, and I'd come back home Friday night exhausted. And my orchids didn't get looked at for a week. Well, having mounted orchids would have been a bit of a daft idea, wouldn't it? So I didn't have any then. I do now. I have the time. I'm retired. So let's have a think about why some orchids die. A lot of the times it will be cultural issues. They're just trying to grow in an area that doesn't suit them. Now that's down to us. But if you qualify that by saying you can apply some careful choosing as you sort of build your collection up, and stick to orchids that you've perhaps already got a couple of that are doing well, we'll get a few more of those then. They'll probably do okay. If you venture out into new genera, then have a think. What care do those plants need? Try and find out before you get the plants. Now, okay, somebody may just buy you one and you're stuck with it and you'll have to do the best you can. And that's all we can all do, is the best we can. And given the time we've got to spend with our orchids. That's all we can do, is the best we can. But there is a form of neglect that is acceptable. Let me qualify that a bit, because that sounds a bit daft. There are some plants, like let's say my cattleyas. Now, a little bit iffy because they're in holy clay pots and large bark. But if those got absolutely soaked Monday morning, and I went away for 3 or 4 days, when I get back they'll be fine. However, there are some plants that just won't stand drying off and staying dry for a couple of days. They're not going to like it. They will start to go downhill, and it may be a very slow process, because I often think some plants you actually take home to die. It might take 2 years, And it's a slow process sometimes, and others just keel over in a couple of weeks. But analyse the care you can give them first, and then work with plants that are going to do okay with that care, and you're far more likely to get success. And that brings joy and happiness. You know, especially if you've bought a plant out of bloom, a pot full of green, you know, and it's grown and it's pushed some new, and then suddenly there's a spike or some buds. And I don't know about you lot, but that gives me extreme pleasure, because it will be a first time bloomer for me. Now, I buy quite a few plants that are already in bloom, and I am attracted by the pretty blooms. But most of the time nowadays, if I see a plant at a show or at an Orchid Society sales table, I'll have heard of it. If I haven't, I'll probably avoid it, even though it might have pretty blooms, because I could be taking home something that's just not going to do well. But then I'll Google it if I can get a flipping signal, and I'll look it up and try and find out a bit about it, literally on my phone, standing next to the plant with my hand on it so nobody else takes it. And then if it comes up trumps and I think, well, I may not have heard of that one, but that sounds like that's going to do okay, we'll have that then. You know, snap decision there and then. Started with pretty blooms, but with a bit of extra effort prior to just picking it up and taking it home to die. And that way, when I get it home, I'll have some form of certainty that it's going to do okay. Right, other reasons. Well, there's the obvious ones. You know, the big stores, the supermarkets, you know, the do-it-yourself places, big box stores or whatever they're called, you know, the likes of IKEA, the things like that. These are bought-in plants, looked after by people that, in the main, I can pretty safely say haven't got a clue what they're doing. That's if they're looked after at all. These are business items. They're no different to a tin of paint, a lawnmower. You know, they're items in the shop that are bought in to sell as fast as possible and make a profit. That includes the plants. They don't buy them to look after them for a couple of years. They buy them to sell them. And they don't plan on looking after them. They plan on getting them out the door and making a profit. So let's have a think about how those plants got there. Let's think about here in the UK, for instance. Most of the mass-produced type plants that are going to appear in the UK have come from either the Netherlands or Germany. There are some exceptions. There's some other EU countries that are hybridizing and producing mass-produced, you know, market plants. But in the main, that's where the big nurseries are. and they've grown those plants on as fast and as cheaply as they possibly can, because time is money. People need wages, heating, lighting, yeah? So it's done as fast as it possibly can be done. And often, at the point of sale, the plant is looking good, but isn't in the best of health. It may be in a pot that it really shouldn't be in. It may have got the cheapest media possible put in that pot to last just long enough to get those blooms out and get it sold. So it's already starting to go downhill. And you'll often find those plants have got poor root systems. Yeah, well, a lot of them are sold in clear pots. Well, have a look. And if they're not in a clear pot, try and look round the base, poke your finger around, you know, see if you can see root life near the base of the plant. And if all you can see is soggy roots at the base of the plant, quite honestly, if it was me, I'd leave it on the shelf. It can stay there, let it die in the shop, and keep my money in my pocket. You know, I don't have a lot of that stuff. I'm on a limited income, just my, you know, retirement money, that's it. So I'm cautious about splashing out, shall we say. So, some plants you get are in a poor state. So they are automatically some form of recovery plant. Now, recovering a plant from a poor state is an art. It doesn't necessarily come naturally. But, you know, there's enough videos around YouTube on, you know, what to do with my Phalaenopsis that's all the roots have rotted off, bar one, or, you know, or there's one new one coming out. So, you know, there's plenty of information around on how to try and recover plants. But the most important thing is if a plant hasn't got a good root system and has lost a lot of its roots, it's not going to hydrate very well. So keeping it in a house environment with humidity down near 20% is not going to help. Yeah. Also, putting it in incredibly bright light won't help, because it's going to fire up the transpiration rate to such an extent the plant will just exhaust itself. It'll lose whatever hydration it had within its canes or its pseudobulbs or its thick fleshy leaves, and it'll end up depleted and start to show that shriveling effect, crinkly effect. And if it hasn't got a root system, it can't replace it. So it's now under severe stress. And those are going to be hard work. There will be losses. Yeah? Now, if you've paid £1 for a plant that's just dropped all its flowers and it looks awful, but it's got some roots on it, you've got a bargain. If it hasn't got any roots on it and it's in that state, you have to stop and think, well, it's only £1. I can sacrifice that and see if I can get this one going again. So you have to stop and think, can I be bothered rescuing plants, or shall I wait till I see a good one where I can see a root system, I can see some new growths, and it's got a much, much bigger chance of making it and growing on well. You can look at the other end of the market, seedlings. You know, little young plants, not long out of a flask, potted up, and are starting to grow on. Now, those are not necessarily hard work, but they're a long-term project. Unless it's something like a Tulumnia, which can bloom within 2 years. And some will take 7 or 8 years. Do you want to put that amount of time looking after a plant that is a few green leaves in a small pot? Or would you rather pay extra and get a mature one that's definitely blooming size? Yeah? Blooming size. There's some cons that go on in the marketplace. Some private sellers even get up to it. You've got a huge specimen plant in your, so let's say, in your private collection. And it's got far too big for its pot. There's quite a few older bulbs on it that have gone leafless, and you want to split it up and start a few plants again, and you end up with a few bits left over. You know, they might have like a couple of back bulbs and a nice new growth. Well, you can't call that flowering size anymore. Sorry, mate, but it's just fundamentally wrong. The original plant was, the bit you've just broken off is not necessarily flowering size. Once you've detached it, it's lost its association with all of the rest of the plant. It's lost its strength. Doesn't mean to say it won't grow on well and become flowering size. It's got a bit of a head start compared with a seedling. So thinking about what you're buying will help avoid disasters. You're going to get some disasters. You're going to get a plant that you think the world of, and it's going to die. It happens to everybody. It happens to the best. I can remember when I joined the Orchid Society, somebody, I said, who are the good growers? Who are the experts round here? And a few were pointed out, and I had a chat to one of them, and one of the first things he said, oh, you don't become an expert without a trail of dead plants in your wake. And it is the story. You get some losses, but the biggest thing to understand is why. Why did my orchid die? And if you've got a definitive reason why it died, then don't do it again. As I said, a lot of the time it will be cultural issues, not providing a suitable environment. It's just too far away from where it feels comfortable. So if you try and avoid those situations, you're on a reasonable path straight away. You take something like a Masdevallia. No, let's pick on a Restrepia, even worse. Now, Restrepias come from very, very humid areas where there's very rarely any sunshine. They might get an odd little flare of sun through a gap in the trees where the wind's blown a branch off or something, but under normal situation they're relatively shady and very high humidity. You're talking 85–90% humidity. That's a lot. Now if you've got humidity like that in your lounge, your curtains are going to go green. You're going to get algae and mould growing on your walls and water streaming down your windows, so you can't do it. But what you could do is have some form of case. You know, I forget what they're called now, but, you know, oh, Wardian case. You know, or a converted aquarium, or just a purpose-built environment where you can keep that humidity high. You know, and you can have some sort of moss and some bark and some mounts and some miniature ferns and things, and have a beautiful environment for some orchids to grow in. But, you know, you try putting a Restrepia on a kitchen windowsill, it probably won't do too well. Put a Phalaenopsis in the same place and it may thrive. Put a Cattleya there and it may do wonders. But it's all geared up to environments that the plant does well in. And even though they might do okay in a lesser environment, they'll do well in the right environment. Knowing that environment is not that difficult to find out, because you're looking in the main at the genera. With a few exceptions, like dendrobiums, you know, there are so many different environments because they are just growing in so many parts of the world, from quite high up mountainsides in montane forests down to hot steamy jungly places. Some are in deciduous forests where they're sat in the sun for a fair bit of the winter, so they dump their leaves because there's not a lot of rain around and they just can't cope with it, so they have a dormant phase. Many environments. But you know, you get a Nobly hybrid, that's not fussy. You get Nobly the species, you've got a fussy orchid. But the hybrids have had the fussiness taken away. So, you know, they don't do bad. The Phalaenopsis type dendrobiums don't do bad. They'll put up with a lower humidity. You know, so they're okay as houseplants. Some Cattleyas do okay as houseplants. Not all, but a good few will. You know, give them the bright light that they need without the burning sun through the glass. You know, they can do okay. So it's just a matter of thinking about what you buy, where you buy it from, how good it is when you get it, and can you look after it? Can you put some time in? Sometimes a lot. I've got a lot of mounted orchids. I dread the thought of going away for a week in the summer. I'd come back and probably find some dead ones. But then my humidity's high. I might get away with it. I haven't risked it yet. Again, with limited funds, you don't go off on flashy holidays. You tend to take little short breaks every now and again. But anyway, it's just some thoughts about why some orchids die. And a lot of the time it will be cultural reasons, or the fact that you've just started with a bad plant that's already dying when you bring it home. You know, it's coming up to the time of year which, well, I just couldn't believe it. There's a market in my local town every Monday, and okay, at the moment it's October. We haven't had a frost yet. It's not actually that cold. We've even got some warm air coming in. But when I first moved down into this area, I went down there on a February morning and it was -2. That was the air temperature, and there was a cold wind blowing which put a wind chill probably down heading towards -10. And somebody had some lovely Phalaenopsis right out in that wind for sale. Now at that point they looked quite good, but I could virtually guarantee those plants have been chilled so badly that they were probably going to die. That's a warm growing plant, and putting that in a wind chill of those sort of temperatures all day, you know, that market opens like 8 o'clock in the morning and starts packing up about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. It's not going to do them any good, is it? So sometimes your plant is already so stressed and set back when you buy it that you're onto a loser, as they say. You're not going to do well with that one. You know, so have a think about where the plant's been. And this is where you come on to perhaps orchid nurseries, if you can get to them. I know not everybody can, but the chances are those plants are being looked after quite well by people who know what they're doing in an environment that's pretty suited to them. So they're not necessarily stressed. So, you know, where you get your plants from can have quite an important factor on how good a plant you're going to get. You can buy plants online. That doesn't mean to say you're going to get a bad plant. Far from it. I've bought some of my best plants online, but they did have very good pictures of the plants before I bought it. As I said, be wary, unless it's a reliable seller that you can trust, of people that say you will receive plant like on pictures. Well, describe like on picture. That's subjective. You know, does it mean very, very like the one on the picture? Or does it just mean it's the same type of plant? Half the size. So be wary of people who are not prepared to take pictures of the actual plant you're buying. And if they've got pictures of the actual plant you're buying, it's safer. You've still got postage to deal with and shipping. You know, if you're in the middle of winter and your overnight temperatures in your country and the country it's heading for are below zero, you're going to chill your plant, aren't you? So it's not going to do it a lot of good. So, you know. Anyway, just some thoughts about, I've just noticed, I think, that Nobly's opening up there. You stupid plant. What happened to the spring? It's flowering out of season. That's probably because it's absolutely bursting with health and energy and it feels like it can. Perhaps it's been a bit warm for it. Because that Nobly, all of its canes finished growing probably 3-4 weeks ago. Now at that point in its life cycle, it should be heading into its winter, but then it's a hybrid. You know, so you're never quite sure what's in there. It's basically Nobly hybrids crossed together to produce more Nobly hybrids. That's how they work. But nonetheless, that's blooming out of season. And the chances are that's purely because it's come to the point where it should be cooling down a bit and getting that extra brighter light and not quite so much water, and it didn't get that because it hasn't cooled down that much yet. You know, it's got the bright light now, the shade netting's off, but yeah, that's producing buds out of season, hopefully not too many, leaving plenty of space for the spring blooming. But you know, things go out of season. I had a question on that. If you buy a Nobly hybrid in the middle of the summer in full bloom, it's been forced. It's been put in a set of conditions to bring it to the marketplace for a certain time of year. Things like Easter, things like Mother's Day, yeah? Well, if you're a mass producer, it's no good having pots full of plants that are just green on Mother's Day because nobody's going to buy them. You want them in full bloom. So they're out of season blooming and they take a while to get back to where they should be. So you buy one of those plants that should be a late winter, early spring bloomer in the main, and then you find it doesn't. It doesn't because it hasn't got itself back where it should be yet, and it can take 2 or 3 years to set a plant back onto its normal annual cycle. So if you've bought a Nobly hybrid in full bloom and it wasn't in early spring, then the following early spring it might not bloom either at all or as well. Then you get a bit disappointed. Well, be patient. It'll come back in. I mean, I had one that I bought in bloom. It's got other things in it. It's not just a Nobly, quite honestly. But nonetheless, it was in bloom in August. And I bought it in bloom. Well, the following year, it bloomed in June. That was this year. So I wonder what it's going to do next year. Maybe May? Maybe April? Maybe March? It may bloom again in June because of what else is in it. Because it really has got other things in it. It's not just Nobly crosses in there. There's other species in there as well, or other hybrids. Anyway, some thoughts on why plants can die. But don't accept the fact that it's all your fault, because a lot of the time it won't be. A lot of it is, you know, you do the best you can with your environment and you do the best you can to buy reasonable plants, and it will go wrong sometimes. You know, don't hang up your hat and chuck all your plants in the bin and say to yourself, I can't grow orchids. We all lose a couple now and again, and the idea is to try and work out why you lost the plant. And you'll probably come up with the answer quite a few times that it wasn't your fault at all. It just wasn't a good plant when you got it and you've struggled with it, you know. While I'm there, I think this is day 2 or day 3. I'm going to keep doing this. I filmed this as part of my end of season updates as this bloom had just opened. And at that point it had no purple tinges on the leaves and no sign of any tessellations. Well, a couple of days later I would suggest that bloom is now 1/4 of an inch bigger in diameter. If you look at the 2 bottom sepals, they're now overlapping my hand, and we can now see some tessellations and just a hint of the purple. There's one just opening. Yeah, this is going to be a bit of fun to watch these blooms grow. I suspect by the time this bloom has reached its full size, it will be sticking out an inch either side of my hand. That's how much Vanda blooms can grow. So we'll watch. That's the first one opened, and I'm just going to film it probably every 3 or 4 days, just tack it on the end of a video or something, and we'll keep our eye on it. It'll be a bit of fun to watch it progress from what it looks like when it's just opened, which is a creamy colour, to going to white, to getting the tessellations and getting its purple tinge. Yeah, we'll just watch that happen. Plus, it's going to increase in size quite dramatically. Just a bit of fun. Okay, chatty one, and I'll see you next time. But don't, just because you lose a plant now and again, don't get all defeatist and think to yourself that you can't grow orchids. Quite honestly, anyone can grow orchids, sometimes with a very limited amount of knowledge. Just depends on which type you pick on. Yeah? Don't pick on really obscure stuff that you can't even pronounce, and I mean, it may do well, but that's called pushing your luck. Stick to the intergeneric Oncidium types. They're pretty sturdy, pretty easy to get, pretty easy going. Dendrobium nobile hybrids, Phalaenopsis type dendrobiums in the main are pretty easy going, and obviously your Phalaenopsis complex hybrids. You start heading towards Phalaenopsis species, you need to be more precise in their care and their environment. But the old complex hybrids that are mass produced, they are so tolerant. So, get yourself going on stuff that you can do okay with, and it builds an element of confidence. And then you can start branching out into the more, I won't say obscure, but let's call it adventurous. I mean, I got adventurous and look where I ended up. It could have been deemed the silliest thing I've ever done. But I've got more enjoyment out of this place since I converted it to grow plants, rather than just having my arse parked in it with a glass of wine or a cup of coffee every now and again and somewhere for the cat to sleep, in my chair. But now it's a plant room, and I get more pleasure out of this than I've had out of any other hobby, quite honestly. I spend a lot of time in here pottering about. Sometimes I just stand here and look and see if I can see, a new spike or some buds just cracking open or something like that. And for me, it's extreme pleasure in a very quiet manner. I'm not an excitable chap. I don't bounce up and down and do the football thing, just because some bloke in frilly shorts has kicked a ball through the goal, and got paid £10,000 a week to do it. That doesn't make me jump up and down, but it does some. Anyway, so just a chat about thinking about what you buy, thinking about how you look after them, and try and start with good plants that are going to work okay in the place you're going to put them and the amount of time you've got to spend with those plants. And then you should be successful in the main. And don't get despondent just because a plant keels over. Some of them are just going to do that. They're just not happy. I mean, I had a dozen Masdevallias at one point. Now I got 3. You know where the others are? Yep, under the hedge, because this is not the right environment to grow them in. I tried my luck, and I'd class that as a miserable failure. But the 3 I've got seem to be doing okay. So they're more heat tolerant, that's why. But when you buy a Masdevallia hybrid with lovely pretty orange or yellow blooms on, you haven't got a clue what it's in its parentage. And if it's got Ignea or Vechiana in it, they are cold growers. Not cool, cold. And if it's got that in it, it's not going to like heat. Miltoniopsis, don't like heat. Nellie-Islas, don't like heat. Yeah, but loads of the other Oncidium intergenerics, they love it. You know, providing the humidity's not too low, they do great. So try and pick on stuff that you're going to do well with, that you have a good certainty of success. Have that success and enjoy the pleasure that your orchids give you. Because otherwise there's not a lot of point in growing them, is there, if they don't give you pleasure. There's a bit of pleasure up there, that Vanda. So, see you next time.